During the GameCube's lifespan, not only did Nintendo publish one M-rated game, being Eternal Darkness Sanity's Requiem, but they later published a second M-rated game in 2005 called Geist. Developed by N-Space, a team known for handheld ports and later known for Call of Duty games on the DS, this first-person adventure game is a unique twist in that you control an astral being and possess other characters. So, is this unique title a worthy experience, or is it a ghastly time? Let's find out. Geist has you playing the role of John Ramey, a scientist and agent of a military unit called CR2. John receives a message from his friend, Agent Bryson, whom is undercover as a scientist and witnesses weird experiments happening at the Volks Corporation facility. At this point, John, alongside the CR2 unit, infiltrate the facility to put a stop to the scientist's work, retrieve information at the lab, and escort Agent Bryson to safety. Things go downhill fast though, as the Volks Corporation fights back and a possessed soldier takes out the team, except for John and Agent Bryson. John then wakes up locked in a device that fires a beam through him, causing his astral projection to be separated from his body. However, when he awakens, a little astral girl named Gigi rescues John and tries to explain a bit of what happened to him. Throughout the game, you will have to cleverly navigate the facility you're in by possessing other characters and seeing what is really happening at the Volks Corporation. While the characterization isn't too deep, the overall plot is interesting to stick with until you reveal the mystery behind it all. Now, Geist is, like I mentioned earlier, a first-person adventure game. I don't quite want to say it's a first-person shooter because there's less emphasis on guns blazing and more clever environmental puzzles to figure out. Granted, there's a good amount of gunplay here when the times arise, but overall, this is a game that's more akin to something like BioShock. When exploring the Volks Corporation facility, you will not have access to weaponry at all times, as John is an astral projection. What makes this game really unique, though, is that when in astral form, you can possess a variety of environmental objects. Ever wanted to possess a computer? Go ahead. Ever wanted to possess a telephone? Ring away. Ever wanted to possess a bed and look like a traditional ghost? Well, this game has you covered. You will need to do these things to scare characters enough to get them into a terrified state, which weakens their psyche, allowing you to go ahead and possess them. Each character has a white aura around them, which shows that they're mentally strong. When you scare them once, they will have a yellow aura showing that they're starting to get a little freaked out. Use another object to scare them, and they'll have a red aura, which is your cue to possess them and take control of their body. You won't be able to use just any objects though, which makes it more like a puzzle than a free-for-all scarefest. Exploring your surroundings is key, but be careful, as John does have a health meter that decreases the more he's exposed without possessing a living thing or object. There are plants that he can drain the life force out of to replenish his health when in astral form, but even possessing an object or living thing will replenish his health fully. Also, there are openings within some doors and cracks in the walls where you can slip through without the need of possessing a character that needs to open doors. Occasionally, you will even come across ghost collectibles that are basically ghost teddy bears. Collecting these will increase your maximum health when in astral form. Now, when possessing living things, this is where mechanics get very interesting. Each person or being you possess has unique traits that are utilized to advance through the game's 9 chapters. When possessing soldiers, you will be able to use the weapon equipped for that specific character. If you control someone like an engineer, you may have access to a retinal scanner to unlock a locked door. You can even control a dog trainer and throw biscuits for the dog to run after, which inherently pulls your character along. The L button is also the possessed character's special trait, which could be something like sprinting or crouching, jumping, or even initiating a slow down time feature towards the end of the game, just to name a few. Now, if you noticed, I've stated you can possess living things, as opposed to just saying people, and that's because you can also possess dogs and rats, for example, in this game. For instance, you have to possess a dog at one point in the game to run over to rats and scare them, which then lets you jump out of the dog's body and possess the rat's body so that you can go through a tight space to keep advancing. Another example of a scenario is when you need to possess this chef over here, which takes several steps to terrify him, but when you do, you need to use rat poison to make food that'll take out all the guards waiting for a meal, which clears a path for you later. This is something I feel would have most likely been in a Hitman game. It's a really cool mechanic, and for its time, was very original. Now, when using firearms in the game, you will have infinite ammo, but will need to still reload in between clips. Occasionally, some weapons have an alternate fire mode like grenades, which definitely comes in handy. However, you won't be just fighting against soldiers in this game. At a later point in the game, and not a spoiler, there are monsters you will go up against as well. There are some smaller bug-like creatures that spit fire at you, while there will be larger monsters that go invisible and can only be hit once they're visible. The game actually does a decent job of changing up the types of enemies you will face off against as you progress further into the story. Additionally, the game has several boss fights that do a great job of breaking up the gameplay. And the bosses aren't just fire away and dwindle their health down. You will need to find their weak spots before doing damage to them. I really enjoyed the boss fights here, especially this one against 2 stone golems and this creature that rolls around. The campaign does take about 4 to 6 hours to beat depending on your skill level, and once you beat it, you can still revisit the chapters and try to collect the remainder of the host collectibles. For every 2 host collectibles found, you will unlock either a new character or new level for the game's multiplayer modes. There are over 30 host collectibles in total, with about 4 in each chapter. And speaking of multiplayer, Geist has 4-player multiplayer for you to duke it out with friends. There are 3 multiplayer modes: Possession Deathmatch, Capture the Host, and Hunt. The Possession Deathmatch is essentially Deathmatch, just that you have to possess an NPC first to use against your opponents. Capture the Host has you possess an NPC and dispossess them in a certain area so you can cash in the most points. You can also take down your opponents for an additional point each. Hunt has you choose between playing as the ghost or a host. If playing the host, you must try to eliminate the ghost before it possesses your body and tries to kill you. As the ghost, you must possess your opponents and force them into a death trap while they try to break free from your control. What is very much appreciated is the addition of multiplayer bots. So, if you just want to jump into some instant action, you can still enjoy learning maps and going up against bots. Honestly, the multiplayer is probably one of my favorite parts of Geist. Every mode is fun to play, and performance seems to run best here, where the controls are tighter due to this. Geist is a one-of-a-kind experience for the GameCube, but unfortunately, it is marred by some issues. First off, the game's frame rate is erratic. This game fluctuates anywhere between 15 frames a second to 60 frames a second, but usually hovers at the 30 frames per second mark. I usually don't mind unlocked frame rates too much, between 30 to 60 frames per second, depending on the game, but it's so inconsistent here that it detracts from the experience. Which leads to my next gripe, the controls. While the controls are fine for the most part, the gunplay can be rough since it's not smooth to aim due to the erratic frame rate. Also, the turn and look speed is much slower than I'd like, and there's no way to change this in the options. Next up is pacing. While I thoroughly enjoyed my time with the campaign, the game itself does take a bit to get moving. I will say, on the flip side, the game's final 2 to 3 chapters are easily the strong points of the game. Visually, Geist is an okay looking game, texture work is mostly good, but the character models and their animations can be janky. Speaking of their animations, I even had a few scenarios where the bodies didn't even animate, yet they were running. That was weird, but I got a laugh out of it. Environments are nicely detailed for the most part. The astral effects were neat, and was cool seeing a different visual effect when controlling John in his astral form. There are a few scenes that I thought were cool to see in action when things are not quite as they seemed. But as mentioned, the game's frame rate is so inconsistent and hurts the visuals quite a bit. In terms of audio, sound effects do a great job of immersing you into the game. The ambiance, the occasional creepy voices like this one right here, and the gun effects are all done well. The voice acting isn't anything to write home about, but it's far from bad, and I do appreciate that they had voice acting in the story. In terms of the soundtrack, Geist's score is pretty good. While not something amazing, it goes with the game and slowly became one that stuck with me the more I played it. Honestly, the soundtrack sounded something like I would have heard in a late N64 game, and I'm not saying that's bad at all, but there's something about the tones in the music that sounded something very similar to that console era. Geist is one of the most unique experiences on the GameCube without question. While it has performance issues, the controls are a bit sluggish, and the soundtrack isn't very strong, the overall game is still a fun time to be had. Those aspects do prevent Geist from being deemed a great game, but what's here is still a very cool game that I recommend GameCube owners look into. The campaign is still very much worth your time, and the multiplayer is a surprisingly fun time. It won't be for everyone, and it is a bit slower paced, but I was hooked into the experience all the way to the end.